Let's say you want to put away some money for your child, something that they can use in the future, a kind of security, if you'd like to say. How would you invest? What instruments would you invest in? What form of investment would you make so that this child can now depend on this, I don't know, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years later, when the child needs something, this investment is there. What kind of investment would you do? And let's say you have a sizable amount, and that's of course proportional to your earnings, your monthly income, whatever. So you have a sizable amount you want to invest. You could invest in a bank, you could invest in a fixed deposit. Of course, the problem with a fixed deposit is that the current interest rates are pretty low, definitely in the single digits and perhaps even lower than that. Once upon a time we thought banks were safe, but we now know of several banks that have closed up and investors have lost their money. So it's not completely safe also. What is the safety that you get? So in any investment you look at three things. What is the safety? What is the return on investment? And what is the flexibility? What is the ability to get the money when I need it? These are the three things that you look at when you're looking at investment, right? So banks are low in returns. Yes, you can get the money when you want. If you have a fixed deposit, you can practically go and get it in an hour or so. You can tell them, look, I want to break my FD, I want to take money. So that's possible. But security, I'm not so sure anymore. So if you look at, if banks are not a good option, then what else is a good option? Mutual funds have made it easy for us to invest in the stock market. So perhaps you might think that it's a wise thing to put some money in the stock market, something that you can use when you need on a rainy day, for example. Or maybe you decide to invest in real estate, buy a house or a bit of property somewhere which can later be liquidated and the money can be taken back. Remember, we're looking at something which is an investment, and that's the thing that we're looking for, right? So how can we be able to sell this and take out the money when we want it? That is our objective. Perhaps you have a daughter, and if you have a daughter, you will certainly consider gold as an option. In India, gold has traditionally been the wealth that you give to your daughter. Why? Let's take a farming community, let's take a family of farmers, and they have property and they want to get their daughter married off. Now, if they gave the daughter a part of the property of the land that they have, the daughter will either have to dispose of it and go somewhere else, or she will have to stay there and work the land, right? Or at least, look after the land if you have to. So a daughter often gets married and has to go and live with a husband. So the ability to move from one place to another was something that was valued in marriage. And of course, when that's important, we look at, do you want a movable asset or an immovable asset? Property is an immovable asset. You can't move it from one place to another. So the only movable asset that people traditionally in India have had faith in is gold. The idea is that, of course, the value of gold does not go down. It was probably also not a time when people had a lot of faith in currencies. We've had several currencies come and go in history. It could be in recent history also, certain currency notes totally were banned one day and they became useless, right? So currency is not something that you can depend on. So they decided that gold is the thing to invest. All right, so now we've considered, what are the things we've considered? We've considered bank fixed deposits, we considered gold, we considered real estate, all right? So among all of this, where would you go? Economists tell us that we now live in something called the knowledge era. In the knowledge economy, The best investment you can make is in learning, and I'm careful to use the word learning rather than education. Actually, economists don't make that distinction. I just made it. And I made it because we expect, when we speak about education, we're looking at school, we're looking at college, we're looking at formal education. And in India anyway, not many people have that much faith in the quality of education that we have. So that is why I said learning rather than education. But a good education should provide us with valuable learning. Otherwise, what's the point of education? So for the time being, let's look at education as and learning as the same thing, as economists would actually use that. Here's the thing, there are good and bad investments everywhere. A company that is fundamentally flawed will probably fold up pretty soon, and even though the share prices are good today, it may not stay that way. The same thing applies for all forms of investment. So just because it belongs to a particular category of real estate, gold, whatever, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that it's the best investment. You need to look at it a little more closely than just the category that's in. So how do we do that in education? How do we decide what's good in education, and how do we know whether we're doing it right? The first question is, when are you going to encash this check? This check of education, the investment that you made in education is going to be encashed maybe 15, 20 years down the line, 25 years down the line. And the market conditions that prevail at that time is going to determine the value of what your investment is, right? Supposing you invested in gold, 25 years later, nobody wants gold, then you will not have any value for that investment, it's lost. So how can you ensure that the learning that you have continues to stay valuable 20, 25 years down the line? This is the most important question to ask. And if you can ask that question, you can also ask the question of, what is it that I can learn that would be valuable for me later on in life? That also brings me to a second part of the investment in education. Let's go back to an earlier example of buying a house as an investment, a real estate investment. Let's say I don't have a house and I decide to buy a house. It serves two purposes. Of course, there is the primary purpose of investment. So I buy a nice big fancy house, saying that maybe 20 years down the line I can sell it. And between you and me, we both know that houses by themselves in India are not that valuable. What is valuable is the property that the house is on, right? Because the new buyer is going to come along, break down this house and build the house in the way that he wants it. So it's that property that's valuable and not the house itself. But as long as I have a house, it serves me two purposes. One, it is the investment thing, and second, I can live in it. I now have a home. So that value also has to go into this calculation of what it is, right? So if you have the right education and you look at it purely from economic point of view, yes, it still makes a good investment. But what makes it a wonderful investment is how it changes your life. The quality of life can change if you have a good education. And by good education, I mean an education that helps you learn the things that you need to know to help you manage the future. So how do you get that? Well, the one thing that is not going to help is sitting there and learning some things by rote memory, especially when it is some stuff that's already written by somebody many years ago, and just learning it by rote is not going to help you very much. It has its uses, I'm sure, but it's not the primary thing that's going to help you. So what else consists of education that I could use? The first thing, and one thing that I always think of, is that education to most of us is about learning facts. But that's not what learning is. As a cognitive psychologist, I know that when I talk about learning, we're looking at three different things. One is learning facts, okay, or learning thought, cognitive stuff, the stuff that you can write in a book, right? So that is one set of things. Second set of things is how I feel, right? How do I feel? How can I feel happy today? What is the purpose of life? How can I improve my relationships with people? So there's a whole set of things which Daniel Goleman calls emotional intelligence, and it is something that can be trained. It is something that you can learn how to manage your emotions better. So that's a second thing that you have to do. And the third thing that somehow we forget even more is that a lot of our learning has to do with movement, has to do with our body, right? So a good education also teaches us how to move, how to take care of our body, because that's just as much as education as anything else. If you ask a cognitive psychologist, what is the period that a child learns the most in? And the psychologist will tell you, it is not school, it is not college, it is not when you go to work, it is from the age of 0 to 2. This is the prelingual period. It's a time before child learns language. So what is child learning at that time? Mostly muscular coordination. So if you look at the brain and its structure and how it's sending out nerves to the whole body to control our body at a very, very fine micro level, right? So that is a huge part of the work that the brain is doing. And our conscious knowledge and what's in our mind is only a smaller part of it. So going back, we have three things that education should actually look at. Number one is the facts and things that we think about, or our thoughts, our cognition, whatever you want to call it. Number two, our emotions, our feelings. How can we learn to manage our feelings better? How can we learn to express our feelings? How can we learn to be open to them? How can we learn to not express them when they're inappropriate? So feelings is the second. And third is, it's all about movement. It's about muscles. It's about learning how to move your body, move your muscles. And because a generation of education has not given enough importance to that, we have now come to a world where it is mostly sedentary jobs. I personally would like to see more movement integrated into regular classrooms, and not just once in a while for a physical education class or a drill class or something. So all these three elements are important to get a good education. And also remember, a good education is something that is forward looking. It is something that will help you in the future, help you bear many things, bear fruit as you go along, and not just that, makes life pleasant, quality of life, and return on investment. Remember my example about the house? So this is what are the essential things that you look at when you're asking, is my investment in education worth it or not?